A man sat in a cell under the Red Keep and waited to be executed for a murder he had nothing to do with. He got a trial. Witnesses were called. Testimony was given. And the two people who planned it were not in the room. One had already left for Highgarden. The other had sailed out of the city weeks earlier, taking the only other witness who mattered with him. So let's run the case nobody ran. Every piece of evidence is on screen, and has been for over a decade. Put it in the right order, and it says something the confession doesn't. Olenna Tyrell killed Joffrey Baratheon. She admits it. She did not plan it. And the distance between those two sentences is the reason an innocent man was condemned to die. Here's the version most people carry, and it isn't wrong. It's just short. At Joffrey's wedding feast, Olenna Tyrell leans in to fix Sansa Stark's hair and necklace and takes a stone. The stone is poison. It ends up in Joffrey's cup. He drinks, he chokes, he dies in his mother's arms. Years later, Olenna tells Jaime Lannister it was her, and asks him to make sure Cersei knows. Case closed. Queen of Thorns. Poisoned the king. Walked away from it. But run it back, and the confession leaves three questions standing. Who built the weapon? Who chose the person who would carry it into that room? And why did a plan that worked perfectly leave the blame sitting on a Stark girl and Cersei's own brother? None of those answers are Olenna. Every one of them is somebody else. And by the end of this, the poisoning is going to look like the easiest part of the whole thing. Exhibit 1. The necklace. Start with the object, because the object is the case. Before the wedding, Sir Dantos Hollard gives Sansa a necklace. Dantos is the drunk knight she had saved from being killed for sport at Joffrey's name day, and who was made the court fool instead. He tells her it's a family heirloom. He tells her to wear it. She wears it. And that is the whole trick. Not the poison, the delivery. The night Joffrey dies, Dantos rows Sansa out of King's Landing to a waiting ship, hands her over to Peter Baelish, and asks for the payment he was promised. He gets crossbow bolts instead. Baelish takes the necklace off her and crushes it in his hand, explaining, without much feeling, that money buys a man's silence temporarily, and a bolt buys it permanently. Still at sea, he finishes the explanation. The stone missing from that necklace was the poison, and he tells her that his new friends will grow stronger for what happened at that feast, and never says who they are. Look at the design of it, because it is vicious. The murder weapon was built as jewelry. It was handed over by a man with an innocent reason to give her a gift. It was carried into the hall by a girl who had no idea she was armed. And the only person who could have been made to talk took a bolt in the chest within the hour. Could Olenna have designed that? Almost certainly. Did she? No. The show names who had it made, who delivered it, and who cleaned up after. That's the first question answered, and the first thing the confession leaves out. Olenna didn't bring the weapon into that room. She found it there. Exhibit 2. The cup. Exhibit 2 is the cup, and I want to walk its route across that feast because the route is not an accident. Joffrey empties the chalice over Tyrion's head and makes him his cupbearer. Then he drops the cup and kicks it under the table, and Sansa Stark bends down and picks it up. The girl wearing the poison hands the murder vessel to her husband. Tyrion fills it. Joffrey demands he kneel. Tyrion won't. Margaery cuts the moment off by announcing the pie. Joffrey drinks and he's fine. He passes the cup to his wife, who sets it down on the table. Then he opens the pie with a Valyrian steel sword, and doves come out of it, and every face in that hall turns upward. That's the window. Between Joffrey's first drink and his second, the cup is standing on the table unattended, beside Olenna Tyrell, while several hundred people watch birds. Then Joffrey wants it back because the pie is dry. Tyrion carries it over. Joffrey drinks, and this time he starts to cough. Count the hands. Sansa lifts it off the floor. Tyrion fills it. Joffrey drinks from it. Margaery sets it down. Tyrion carries it back. 4 people are shown handling that cup, and not one of them killed him. And the episode never gives you a clear look at the moment the poison goes in. Every hand it shows you belongs to somebody innocent. The one it never shows you is the one that mattered. Then watch what happens when he starts to choke. I can't tell you what was in her head, but of everyone at that table, the first voice calling for help belongs to the one person who already knew he was dying. Exhibit 3. The first confession. Here's the part almost every video on this topic leaves out. Olenna confesses twice, and the first one happens while Tyrion is still alive in a cell, waiting for the trial that will condemn him. Not long after the wedding, she's in the gardens with Marjorie, about to leave for Highgarden. And she asks her granddaughter, with no particular weight, the way you'd mention the weather, whether she really thought she'd have let her marry that beast. That's the confession. To her granddaughter. In a garden. On the way out of the city. And watch Marjorie's face when she hears it, because the show is telling you something with it. She didn't know. The person who benefited most from that murder was told about it afterwards, like a piece of news. And the show signs its own work while she does it. Look at her hands. They're at her granddaughter's throat, straightening a necklace, the same gesture she used on Sansa 2 episodes earlier, on camera, while she confesses. So the circle was small. Baelish, Dantos, Olenna. Not the Tyrells, not Marjorie. 3 people, and Baelish had already cut it down to 2. Then Olenna goes home to Highgarden, and Tyrion goes on trial, with his own father sitting in judgment over him. She told the one person in Westeros who would never repeat it, and she told her on the way out the door. That isn't conscience. That's housekeeping. Exhibit 4, the second confession, and what it leaves out. The second confession is the famous one, and it comes years later, when there is nothing left to lose. Highgarden has fallen. Her house is finished. Jaime Lannister hands her a cup of poison. She drinks it without ceremony, and then she tells him what happened to his son. She says it was her. She says she had never seen that poison work before, and that what it did to Joffrey was not what she'd meant to happen. And then she asks Jaime to tell Cersei. She wants Cersei to know whose hand it was. Listen to what that confession is for. It isn't remorse, and it isn't a statement of facts. It's a weapon. It's the last thing she owns, and she spends all of it on hurting the woman who destroyed her family. And notice what isn't in it. She never mentions Baelish, never mentions the necklace or Dantos or where the poison came from. She takes the whole thing, which is either the most generous thing she ever did, covering for a man who is already dead by then, or, more likely, the last brag of a woman who wants the credit for the most consequential murder in the story. Either way, a confession is a claim. It is not a report. The objection. The obvious argument against everything I've said. Who cares who drew up the plan? She dropped the poison in. She admits she dropped the poison in. Legally and morally, that's the murderer. She didn't design it is a technicality. That's fair, and I'll concede the moral half of it completely. She killed him. I'm not arguing she's innocent, and no defense with any sense would try. But it isn't a technicality because of what it explains. If Olenna had built this plan, it would have been Tyrell-shaped. It would have protected Tyrells and left the blame nowhere in particular. What actually happened was Baelish-shaped. It put the poison on a Stark girl, standing beside a Lannister husband, at a Lannister wedding, and it produced an arrest and a manhunt inside a minute. That isn't sloppiness, that's the objective. And that's the third question answered. Now the honest limit of what I can prove. We never see the poison go into the cup. We never get Baelish laying the plan out start to finish. Some of this is reconstruction, and anyone who tells you they can account for every second of that feast is filling in gaps the writers left open on purpose. But the chain of custody isn't reconstruction. Who had the necklace made? Who delivered it? Who killed the delivery man? Those are stated out loud, on screen, by the man who did them. So what did Olenna Tyrell actually do? 2 things, and both of them are harder than the things she gets credit for. The first is about 10 seconds long. She walked up to a girl at a public feast, in front of hundreds of people including a queen who watched everyone, put her hands on her, took one specific stone out of a necklace, and walked away holding a lethal dose. Anyone can tip something into a cup. Almost nobody can do that part, and she chose her cover perfectly. She went to Sansa to offer condolences about her murdered mother and brother, a conversation nobody in that hall would interrupt or look at twice. She used a girl's grief as concealment. That is the coldest thing that happens at that wedding, and it happens in a scene most people remember as kind. The second thing is bigger, and it's the reason this video exists. Olenna's real contribution wasn't the killing. It was agreeing to a plan she could see would land on a girl who had done nothing, She knew Sansa was wearing the poison. Nobody could have known Joffrey would humiliate his uncle into carrying his cup. That part was improvised in front of her, by a boy showing off. But she stood there and watched both of them get walked into a murder charge, one by design and one by pure accident, and she did not move. Then she went home to Highgarden. One was arrested that night. The other was hunted across the country, with a knighthood on offer for whoever brought her in. And Tyrion was tried and condemned to die for something a woman 2 tables away had done. And Olenna never says a word about it, while it would have cost her anything. Not while he was in the cell, not in the years after, not even in the second confession, when she had nothing left to lose and told the truth about everything else. So the answer to the question is this. She didn't build the weapon. She didn't choose the carrier. She didn't design the frame. She agreed to it. She did the one part nobody else in that hall could have done. And then she let 2 people carry the consequences, and stayed quiet until speaking cost her nothing. The cleverest person at that wedding wasn't in the building. He was 300 miles out to sea, and he needed her, because he could not get near that necklace, and she could. So, one question, and it's harder than it looks. 4 people put that poison in Joffrey's cup between them. Baelish, who built the thing. Olenna, who used it. Dantos, who carried it in and got shot for his trouble. And Sansa, who wore it into the room and picked the cup up off the floor and knew nothing about any of it. Rank them, most responsible to least. And tell me where you put Sansa, because she did more of the physical work than anyone on that list and none of the deciding, and I don't think there's a settled answer.